Welcome to Beyond Barriers, the latest episode, and tonight's guest. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce my new co-host, Keisha Dietz, and tonight's guest is Larry Kuperman. Larry, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff. Would it be okay, Jeff, if I reveal how you and I got in contact?
Yes, please do.
Sure. I saw Jeff. I saw an episode of W. Kamau Bell's United Shades of America, and Jeff was one of the people featured on there. And as soon as I heard your story, Jeff, I think it was the very next day that I reached out to you and contacted you via Twitter. And so I just want to thank you for what you have done and for sharing that with the public.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to tune in and check out the show, and we're really honored to have you on the program. As we were just talking about before the show started, Larry is an expert in history and many, many other things. And we talked quite a bit about different things in history. And I think the way this program works, if you've seen it at all before, is it's a pretty free flow of information and conversation. You know, we don't really set it up like a strict interview. So anything you'd like to talk about on the program tonight, feel free to share. And Acacia, feel free to interject at any point. I know you have some questions too for Larry. So if we could start on that, is there any historical stuff that you thought would be interesting for the show tonight, Larry?
Well, yeah, I actually, there is a primary reason that I had asked to be on, and that I appreciate you allowing me this presence, and that was something that has troubled me about the American scene today, and which I hope in some small measure that we can address via our communications tonight. Everyone knows this, but on October 27th in 2018, Robert Gregory Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. He would go on to murder 11 people and to wound 6 others. And his online posts told the reason for that. I'm going to quote directly from him. He was upset at the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or the HIAS, saying, "HIAS likes to bring invaders in to kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered." The emphasis is mine. It was clear in his thinking that the people in this synagogue in Pittsburgh, in the middle of the United States, were somehow less American than he was. And if you look at the people themselves, you had Rose Malinger, 97 years old, Jerry Rabinowitz, 66. Cecil and David Rosenthal, 2 brothers, 59 and 54, Daniel Stein, 71, Richard Godfrey, 65, Joyce Feinberg, 75, Melvin Wax, 88, Bernice and Sylvan Simon, 84 and 86, and Irving Younger at 69. These were people who had lived their entire lives in America. How does somebody think of them as being less American than themselves? And I think part of the reason is because when we tell the story of American history, we pick and choose. I mean, we can't include everything. So there are things that we tell, and that there are things that we don't tell. And to my way of thinking, some of the things that we don't tell are significant and really define who it is that we are as Americans. I tell kids all the time, if you're not interested in history, if you don't understand where we came from and how we got to be where we are now, then you're just not going to have any compass about where we're heading. And that's just it's an obvious thing. I mean, so with that said, I wanted to share what I had written to you, Jeff, before. I said, American history is like a tapestry. You can pull out each individual thread and kind of examine it, but that doesn't give you the sense of what the whole is. You have to figure how it all meshes together. And so I'm gonna tell you a story that most people aren't aware of. It's absolutely historically authentic. I provided links on all of this stuff. But it's a story that I think is surprising to most Americans. And the story goes like this. In 1790, President George Washington, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, Governor George Clinton of New York, U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Blair from Virginia, and U.S. Congressman William Lawton Smith of South Carolina all took a journey together. And that journey was to the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, where they would address the congregation. And again, if you're like most Americans, you're kind of going, wait a minute. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson went to a synagogue? I didn't even know there were Jews in America back at that time. There were, and there's a backstory about why they came there. On the surface, one of the things that they were doing was extending a note of appreciation to the members of the synagogue there, and some portions of it are fairly famous, but are often told without the context. So George Washington wrote to the congregation after the trip as a follow-up and a thank you. Says, "For happily the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support." And so that was a note that he wrote to the congregation. The reason that he was going up there, and the reason that they were kind of touring around, was to gain support for a particular bill that was before Congress. And that bill was 12 amendments to the Constitution, better known as the Bill of Rights. And I think most people in America today, certainly in the year 2020, are familiar at least with the Second Amendment, right? The right to bear arms. But the Third Amendment is equally as important, and it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. To my mind, and again, Jeff, thank you for the introduction that I'm a student of history, but to my mind, that single paragraph sums up much of what America is about. That we're an inclusive place, that the government is here to serve the people, not the other way around. And if the people feel that the government is not acting in their interests, they have the right to protest and to insist that the government follow more closely with their interests. And more to the point, that people have the right to say and believe what they will, and that the press has the right to cover what they will. Those amendments, the Bill of Rights, would be ratified in 1791. So I guess the stumping for the support was effective. But the trip to the synagogue took place in that period between the proposal and the ratification. It took almost 2 years for the Congress to agree that those 12 amendments were what was needed. So those amendments took place, and it was great that Washington had included the non-Christian community, the Jewish community of Rhode Island in that. But there was a deeper reason that Washington took the trip. And to understand why that is, we have to kind of wind back the clock from 1790 when he took that trip to 1740. And in a place called Lesno, Poland, a child was born named Chaim Solomon. Chaim Solomon was a child of Sephardic Jews. Jeff, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the Sephardic Jews, or the Sephardim, were Jews who had lived in the Spanish-speaking territories. So they were from Spain and from Portugal, mostly, and also Holland, which was a Spanish colony at the time. And that would come into play later, but we don't need to look at those details. But so his family had been exiled from Spain or Portugal, probably during the Inquisition, and had ended up in Poland. Chaim Solomon was a bright young man. He studied mostly commerce, but he also learned a variety of languages. So remember, I said he was born in Poland. So he grew up speaking Poland, but like almost all Jews of that time. He was probably bilingual, probably spoke Hebrew as well, but he added on to that, among other languages, German, and then he became fluent in English. In 1775, he left Europe to journey to New York to begin a career as a financial broker for overseas investors. So these were people in Europe that had invested money in the new colonies of America, that believed in America, and they were sending him over there to kind of be a watchman. So again, 1775, that's when our revolution is starting up. He comes to New York. He very quickly joins the Sons of Liberty, the revolutionary group, and he begins, he begins this career that, again, I encourage people to look up his biography, because this reads like a television drama. So he gets arrested as a spy, but then the British find out that he knows all these languages. So they say, hey, we're going to keep you under arrest, but we need you to do something for us. We have these Hessian soldiers that are coming over here to occupy America, but they only speak German. We don't speak German. We need somebody that speaks both English and German. So we need you to act as a go-between. And he does that, but he also uses that position to begin to encourage the Hessian soldiers who are working for the British. I mean, they're foreign mercenaries. He begins encouraging them to defect. After the Revolutionary War, in fact, a lot of Hessian soldiers did stay in the New York area. So he uses this position. He's undermining the British who think that he's working for them, and eventually he's able to escape. Year later, he's arrested a second time, and this time he's sentenced to death. But again, he somehow manages to escape from the clutches of the British, and this time he makes his way to Philadelphia, and he brings his family down there with him. In Philadelphia, Robert Morris is working as the man in charge of the finances for the American Revolution. So when I say the finances, don't just think of it in terms of money. He's the guy that's responsible for buying the weapons, buying the gunpowder, buying the munitions, buying the cannons. I mean, all of the necessities of war flow through his office, plus buying the food. And this is who Solomon goes to work for. So the first year that he's there, he raises $650,000 for the revolutionary cause. Now, that $650,000, in that year's equivalent, the equivalent today in modern dollars would be, he raised $10 billion for the revolution. So he not only is getting money from European Jewry, who were major contributors to the American Revolution, but he also donates every penny that he has to the cause. By August of 1781, the revolution has started in 1777. By 1781, George Washington's Continental Army is poised to deliver a critical blow to the British. They have the British on their heels, but there's a problem. Washington's army is out of food, out of uniforms, out of all supplies, and is on the brink of mutiny. They're starving. Washington goes into a conference with Robert Morris and is told that there is no funds left, that we're completely out of money. So again, this is something that I tracked down, and there are multiple witnesses to this. George Washington's comment is, "Send for Chaim Solomon." And sure enough, that happens, and somehow, by hook or by crook, Solomon is able to raise $20,000 in that year's money, and Washington is able to feed and arm his troops. They march towards the Battle of Yorktown, which is the last battle of the American Revolution. And so here it is, in a very real sense. This Jewish banker that had come over from Poland is the guy that saves the American Revolution. In 1785, Solomon dies. His debts, the debts that are owed to him, are never repaid. He dies absolutely penniless. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the Mikveh Israel Cemetery in Philadelphia. Later on, as history began to record what his deeds were, 2 plaques would be erected to honor him, and those plaques are still there. He'll never live to see it, but the religious freedom that he fought so hard for in his life would become a cornerstone of George Washington's new America. Washington may have had his friend in mind when he journeyed to the Truro synagogue. Was it a question of repaying a debt? And the reason that I bring this up is that there are many components to anti-Semitism. There are many layers to that. One allegation is a constant all around the world, and that's that the Jewish population of whatever country it is has dual loyalties, right? We see this in America where people are described, people like Gary Cohn, if you remember him, who was part of Trump's cabinet, is described as a globalist. The opposite of globalist for this sense is an American, right? Gary Cohn was loyal to something outside of America, to a bigger picture of the world, and wasn't a real American because real Americans can't be Jewish. And it's a funny thing because when you look at the history of it, in a very real sense, there would be no America without the contributions of American Jews.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for explaining that, because this is a lot of history, and especially some of the people that are watching this program, Larry, have no idea about this history, and that's why I thought it would be so fascinating to have you on the program. And I also want to back up just a little bit, and I know I cut you off there, but I wanted to point something out. It was really, I'm really glad that you named the victims from the Tree of Life Synagogue, because so many people know who the murderer was, and his name is remembered, which is really terrible and unfortunate. But quite often, the victims of these type of things are not remembered, and it's really important. So I'm so glad that you said all of their names, and those are the people that really need to be remembered. They didn't do anything wrong. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is this fascinating history that you're speaking about. It's not something that most of us, even as a student of history myself, some of these things that you're talking about, I had never heard of before, and some of the viewers and listeners of this program also will have never have heard this. So it's really it's fascinating, it's important, and it shows that and I wanted to say something as you were talking about how a lot of people believe that Jews have dual loyalties and this sort of thing. This is something in the National Socialist movement, and in my past, we believed that, and we had quotes from George Washington that were anti-Semitic, quotes from Ben Franklin, these different things, and we never heard. Those of us in the movement, and I think a lot of Americans in general, not just movement people that had been in the movement, but generally Americans as well, don't hear these things. And I think it's incredibly important that they know about these contributions that the Jewish people made to the founding of this country, because a lot of people have this bias or this deep-seated anti-Semitism that Jews have not contributed to this country, that they've done things to undermine the country. And here's an example of our founding fathers, George Washington directly, and just as you explained, the revolution, the war for the freedom of America may not have been won without the help of these Jewish individuals that you mentioned. That's incredible, absolutely incredible.
If you want to know how deeply our blood is part of the American story, you only need to look at the base of the Statue of Liberty, perhaps the most iconic symbol of America. Give us your hungry, you're tired, you're poor, your wretched masses yearning to be free. That is from the poem New Colossus, that was written by a Sephardic American Jew, Emma Lazarus, who won a contest with that. The poem was actually written to raise money for the completion of the Statue of Liberty. So it's just one of those funny things. The other ironic thing to talk about is, there were waves of American Jews, there were waves of European Jews coming to America. The earliest Jews came to America before it was America. We settled in New Amsterdam back when it was a Dutch colony. And I mentioned that at one time, Spain controlled, the Netherlands controlled Holland. That was a Spanish colony, and they revolted against Spain. Part of that revolt was a religious dispute between, Catholic Spain and Protestant Netherlands, right? But because of that, because of that combination of events, many Jews settled in the Netherlands. At one time, the Netherlands had control of Brazil. And so the oldest synagogues in this hemisphere, not in the United States, but in this hemisphere in South America, is in Recife in Brazil. That's the oldest synagogue on the Street of the Jews. That's what they called it. I mean, who would have guessed that they'd put the synagogue there, right? But those Jews came over to America, and 7 of them came over on the first boat from Recife. So they had fled from Spain to Holland, from Holland to Brazil, from Brazil to now New Amsterdam. So these are clearly refugees. They have been, chased halfway around the world looking for religious freedom. And so the governor of New Amsterdam greets them by imprisoning them all. He throws them into prison because he did not want to have those people living among them. However, he had a critical miscalculation, and I just love this part of the story. So if you remember from your history, the original settlements in America were not done by nations per se, they were done by corporations. In this case, it was the Dutch West Indies Company was the ones that had settled in the New York area, and that's who Governor Peter Stuyvesant was responsible to. A number of the investors and board members of the West Indies Company were Jewish. So he got a letter from the Home Office that in no uncertain terms basically said, "Let my people go." and that, I mean, that's part of the American story. But again, the reason that I say that, by the way, whenever I tell that story to a Jewish congregation, I always add about them, being released from prison. The first thing that they did was to sue for the right to stand guard duty as other citizens were allowed to do. And I always say, even then we were troublemakers. But that's, but I only do that with in a Jewish room. So, but that was really part of the American experience, and for Jews, for European Jews who were facing discrimination throughout Europe, America was our promised land. We came to America because of the dream of freedom, and that goes back. It's interesting when they teach you about Columbus's journey. They say, well, Columbus crossed. This will reveal how old I am, but in 1492, Columbus crossed the ocean blue. Right, that was the way it was taught. Well, what they don't explain was that in 1492, the last of the Muslim forces in the Spanish Peninsula in Iberia were conquered by Ferdinand and Isabella, by the soldiers of Ferdinand and Isabella. The last city fell, and they immediately began the Inquisition. 1492 is the time that the Inquisition started. Another kind of really unpleasant period. Just for the audience's sake, people think that the Inquisition was this terrible thing that happened, but it was fairly brief. I wish I could say it was. The Inquisition lasted 400 years. I mean, it wasn't all the terrible Torquemada, torture stuff, but it was pretty bad that officially Spain had religious prejudice on the books for about 400 years. That said, the Jews of Europe knew that living in Europe, that only living in Europe was unsustainable, that it could not be done. And we were hundreds of years away from a Zionist movement, from the restoration of Palestine. But America was what we looked at as the promised land. And if you look at the demographics of the Jewish population, I don't want to get too far into the weeds in this, but Jews have the same issues that other people do. It's a little bit complicated deciding who's Jewish. I will just let you know that certainly in America, the largest, most popular form of Judaism is Reform Judaism. Mm-hmm. So for whatever that's worth, and part of that definition, part of the difference in the various forms is how we define who's Jewish. But Israel has always had the law of the return, that if you were Jewish, you could not be denied admittance to Israel. There are some complications to that, but part of that is that if you're somebody that doesn't have any other place to go, you might decide that returning to Israel was a good thing. And of course, there are exceptions to that. For example, Meyer Lansky did move to Israel, but then he was sent back to the United States. Meyer Lansky being one of the founders of the syndicate. So an interesting story for you, Jeff. I was on another presentation with a young African American streamer also, and we were talking about identity, about and I said to him, and I say this at the beginning of every one of my classes. I was once accused of trying to be famous by proxy, right? By somehow saying that that I have relations that I and I always explain this to the class. If you want to claim Albert Einstein, please feel free to claim him. Absolutely, Einstein was Jewish, no question. If you want to claim Sigmund Freud, sure, absolutely. But if you're going to claim them and say that that's part of your extended family, then you also end up with Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein, and those might not be the ones that you care to brag about. And the same thing is true. The same thing is true for African Americans, right? If you want to say, Martin Luther King and the late John Lewis, are paragons of yours, well, that's great. But you also get the baggage of Louis Farrakhan, right? And if there's one lesson to learn from that, it's that people are people.
Absolutely. And see, that's a wonderful point. Excuse me. And I'm so glad you brought that up too, because that's one of the things and one of the problems when I look back at the way I used to think when I was involved in white nationalism, and I know the way that most people think that are involved in that, and a lot of people that are involved in black nationalism or various other forms of extremism, is you paint the world, you see the world through these rose-colored glasses where you are painting large groups of people or as one. So it's like in the movement, for example, we would say, well, the Jews are bad because they did this or that, but you can't paint anybody with the broad brush, any group of people, because it doesn't work like that. Just as you mentioned, there's wonderful Jewish people, there's wonderful black people, there's wonderful white people. The United States was founded on religious freedoms. There were so many people that came here to this country because they were being persecuted in other places. Jewish people, different forms of Christianity, the Quakers,
yep.
Later on the Mormons, there were so many different people, and you can't, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that really encompasses what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to, the public that we're trying to reach, is that you can't paint people or entire groups of people with this broad brush. Sure, one could say, well, and I use this example quite a bit, like Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer, he was a white guy. Does that mean all white guys are serial killer, mass
right.
murderers, cannibals? It doesn't make any sense. But that's how when people get involved in extremism, they get this closed, narrow-minded view, and it's so easy to paint entire groups of people like that, and it's not accurate. It just doesn't even, it's not even based in accuracy.
The other part that goes with it, and I'm going to offer you one of my favorite quotes of all time, but the other part with it is that a lot of our concepts of race are kind of flawed. And when I say that, I mean that just don't stand up to science. Certainly the Nazis and people like Joseph Mengele rewrote their own science stuff because the real stuff just didn't agree with them, But here's the thing for you. First of all, even though I've been teaching about it for literally decades, I have never been to Israel. I was supposed to. I won a scholarship as a teacher. I was supposed to go there. At that time, I was having back problems, and I just decided that my health didn't allow me, and I allowed that opportunity to pass. Maybe when I get done with my working career, maybe I'm going to take some time and go there. But the geography of the modern state of Israel, what used to be Palestine, is pretty interesting. So there's a kind of curve of the Mediterranean, and that's where it is. Well, when you go inland from there, you can't go very far. It's not a big country before you come into mountain ranges. And if you know your New Testament, you start talking about the wilderness where John the Baptist was, where Jesus preached Sermon on the Mount. By the way, a young man that I used to work out with and also debate with said to me once that I quote scripture more than any person he's ever met, and his father was a minister. And I said, you use the tools that God gave you. So there you go on that. But if you look at that land, the reason that land in ancient times was so important is it was the connecting area between the two largest empires of that time, Egypt and what was, Sumeria, Assyria, the Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers that was up there. Mm-hmm. And so there were these caravans that were going through there, and you only had two ways that you could go. You either went by boat, and that was kind of perilous because remember, compasses hadn't been invented. So, if the storm comes up, you don't know which way north is, after that. So you could either do that or go through this land route. And if you went through the land route, you had caravans of stuff going through there. Well, one of the kinds of stuff that ancient Egypt had was slaves from the Sudan, from Africa. So this was a slave route. It wasn't anything compared to American slavery, which really took slavery to a whole nother level. But there were slave routes. If you're any kind of student of human behavior, you know that slaves were male and female, and one might guess that there was some mixing of blood going along the way. That said, and I said I was going to share with you my favorite quote. This is a thing that you really need to have a little bit of biblical knowledge, but I guess everybody knows, Adam is supposed to be the first man, right? I mean, that's, Garden of Eden, Adam is supposed to be the first man. And then the flood comes later on, and only Noah and his family survive and they rebuild it. So this quote comes from Mark Twain. He says, "I come from a long and distinguished family. Our roots go all the way back to Adam, but usually we just stop at Noah." Yes. And the kind of point about that is that if you do any of the ancestry studies, and I'm not talking about the genetic stuff, but if you go back and you take a look at it, everybody that's alive today has some trace of Genghis Khan's blood in them. I mean, that's just the way things work. You have 4 children, they have 8 children, and pretty soon, as you get into some pretty big numbers, everybody's related to everybody else. And I just tell people that. The other thing that I always say on a very real level, if we ever find alien life forms, if we ever find little green men with pseudopods and stuff, you know what that's going to end? That's going to end racism for us. And we will have alien discrimination.
Yep.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've said that so many times too. We have people are so caught up over these differences, like color, religion, these ridiculous biases. But if the aliens landed next week and were attacking the Earth, everybody would come together to fight the aliens. So I mean, and just as you
Yep.
said, and I really like how you put it, because it was very eloquent. But we all really came from the same place, and we're all in a simplistic way, we're all cousins in that sense, and we're all part of greater humanity. So breaking things down and into this tribalism and what we have going on today, where people are wanting just to uplift one group of people over another and things like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because really we're all the same family, we're all part of the human race, and these slight differences over religion or
and if you think about the words you just used, Jeff, and that we say, and we think these things, but then we move away from it. You just used the term human race, implying that there is a single race. Well, I donated blood today, and I was telling you about that before. I like to refer to it at my age as having an oil change. But this was my 103rd blood donation. So at Red Cross, they always tell me, oh, you saved, that you multiply by 3, you saved 309 lives. And I always respond to them saying, yeah, 308 people that I like and that one guy.
Exactly.
But seriously, I don't know who's getting my blood.
Right.
And I don't really care. I don't know if it's a blood donation going to a protester in Portland, or going to one of the Proud Boys in Michigan. And, I don't know. And I don't care.
Exactly.
The guy in the Proud Boys might be a little bit skittish about that. Everything was okay. The surgery was a success, but he did find afterwards he had this craving for corned beef on rye with a little bit of mustard that he just couldn't explain. But that's really the way it is. I'll also tell you a couple of other things. We tend to view the world on a daily basis as static, and it's not. It's changing. It's changing all the time. And we really don't even know what that changes. So work from home, WFH. So I'm head of business development for a computer game company. My company is 100% distributed, and we always were. We hire people regardless of where they live. And there are some funny consequences to that. The furthest distance between any two developers, our multiplayer guru is based out of New Zealand, and our QA manager is based out of Stockholm, Sweden. Their times actually align pretty much, except they're off by a day. I always say Edward's from our future. He just won't give me any stock tips.
Exactly.
Not even a buy Tesla. I mean, not a word from him. So, but our company is completely distributed that way, and I think a lot of companies are going to move to that model. I have told people it's such an advantage for people raising kids, right? Yeah. You don't have to worry about getting to the office. And then in terms of the talent pool, if you say you hire the best of the best, but everybody's got to work out of San Francisco or New York or Detroit or Ann Arbor or wherever, then you're not really hiring the best of the best. You're hiring the best people in that zip code, right? Yeah. And we hire the best. That said, I've had to fill out, we don't do like work for the federal government, but we do work with some large companies. And every once in a while, they will send, their HR department will send out a vendor survey for us to go on. Beats the hell out of me. I know his IP address. I don't know what color he is.
Yep.
Right.
I literally don't. I have a developer in Germany who is kind of shy. He's a fantastic developer, but he's not exactly what you would call a communicator. I've never even seen his picture. And by the way, I'm probably wrong and off base, and it's, it's probably, an old man thing that I keep on saying he, because
it's easy to do, because when you're not there face to face with the person all the time, you might talk to them on the phone, you talk to them through email. I know there's a couple of different things online that I'm on, and you get into the different chat rooms, and the one person that I'm on with there, it's like they automatically assume everybody's probably a guy because most gamers are guys.
Yep.
And then lo and behold, there's like maybe 5 or 6 of us women in there. And then they're like, oh, wait, sorry, didn't want to offend. It's like, dude, we're online. So it's like, what do you expect? I mean, you can't get offended easily, that's for sure.
Just on that, whenever somebody says to me, I didn't mean to offend, I always say the same thing back to them. Hey, if you're comfortable with your racism, I'm comfortable with it. If you're comfortable with your sexism, we're all good.
Right.
But again, I mean, this gets us back to the original point. First of all, there was an article today that came out that was talking about girls in gaming. That 51% were men and 49% were girls, not women. Were girls, and then managed to use the word ladies in an article. There's a comedian, Dimitri Martin, one of my favorite comedians. He said, any sentence, no matter how innocent, can be made to sound creepy if you add the word ladies to the end of it. Wouldn't you agree, ladies? And I just sat there and I looked at that and I go, didn't anybody proofread this before before this went out? So, but there you go. Again, Jeff, a lot of our core beliefs are based on stuff that's just false. So, first of all, the idea that anyone from 2,000, 4,000 years ago, that any line of people came forward without mixing with somebody else.
Exactly. That's it in a nutshell. And if we could get that through to people, I think we'd have a lot less racism and a lot less hate and bias and things like that. I mean, there's really so few real differences when we get down to it. We all have the basic same innate desires and needs and things like that, some of these things that people get tripped up on. I mean, I ask myself that over and over again all the time, like, man, why did it take so long to realize these truths? And sometimes I think a lot of it has to do with dialogue and getting to know other people and experiencing other cultures and other dynamics like that a lot of people don't do. A lot of people shelter themselves, and it's the whole concept of the organization that we started, Beyond Barriers, is that you have this barrier in your mind that you've set it up yourself, and you're not giving yourself the opportunity to understand other cultures. You're just going, okay, well, I heard this about these people and they must all be bad, or
it's the word all. And again, we evolved a term. The origins of it are actually out of the New Testament, but we evolved the term collective guilt, right? That something happened 2,000 years ago. And I mean, I literally remember, so I grew up in the Bronx. I lived out in Michigan for half my life. But the first half I lived in New York, and I was a Bronx boy. And I remember my friends who were mostly Irish Catholic in the early days, being so excited. They came out and they were grabbing me and jumping up and down, saying, "The Pope said you didn't kill Jesus." Which was not something that frankly I had ever lost a minute of sleep over. But I'm glad to know that I got out from that. That the concept of collective guilt, the concept of everybody's the same. So when we were talking about the men from space coming in, that if they landed, that we would be xenophobic against them rather than each other. I'm going to tell you, 48 hours after the men from space showed up, whatever they looked at, and by the way, men or women from space showed up, that some restaurant would have a sign in it that said, aliens not allowed.
Yep.
Okay. And that 48 hours after that, somebody would be standing outside the restaurant with a shirt that said "Alien Lives Matter," right?
Yeah.
That is a nature that we look at people. So again, I try to talk to as many people as I can. I had a discussion. This was a number of years ago, but I had a discussion with a young African American woman who absolutely believed that white Europeans, particularly white European men, had invented genocide. That was absolutely her conviction, and that all racial hatred, came from those people. And I got her point, but I asked her how much she knew about African history. How much do you know about your own history? And I'm not even talking about what happened thousands of years ago. The Hutus and the Tutsis lived in the same villages. Yep. They lived side by side in Rwanda for all of these years. Never a particular conflict. And then a war began spreading into the region. And for reasons that are obscure to us, but that were valid to the people there, the Hutus began killing the Tutsis. And it was as terrible a racial conflict as you could have. First of all, many people didn't understand it as being a racial conflict or even ethnic cleansing, because to us in America, certainly to people in Europe, you can't tell the difference between a Hutu and a Tutsi.
Right.
You wouldn't know that, but that was significant to them.
Well, in that particular genocide, the Hutus had started the rumor that the Tutsis were cannibals and that they were an evil race, specifically that their race was evil. And they passed out machetes. They got machetes out there, and there was, I think, almost 1 million that were butchered.
Within 100 days.
The amazing thing about that, Jeff, let's not be too depressing, is how they were able to move forward with peace, and that they actually have trials going in villages where Hutus will acknowledge their guilt in what they did, will fess up to their crimes and be exonerated for that they will apologize, and that apology is accepted, and they're able to move forward in that. But that's not the only case of it. The newest nation in the world is South Sudan. South Sudan broke off from Sudan. All of the people are the same race, but the ones in the north are Muslim, the ones in the south are animist. And so they, after this terrible campaign of mass rapes and genocide, they split off into this other country. Well, problem solved, right? Except the vice president of South Sudan and the president of South Sudan were for two tribes, and now they're engaged in a civil war. And again, that's not necessarily a quality of Africa. Or, if you look at European history, we had much the same thing within there. But it's a quality of people that if there are three people, the last three people in the world, it won't be long before two of them say to the other, I hate that guy. Mm-hmm. And he's different than us. He's different than us somehow.
And that's the hard thing, because, just as humans in general, a lot of times, put aside race, put aside, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, all of that, we tend to forget that, like you said, you gave blood. Well, we all have the same blood. I don't care if it's Jewish, if it's African American, if it's white, if it's black, yellow, whatever. We all take the same kinds of blood.
The only difference is what food you crave after you get a transfusion. That's
right. Exactly. But we tend to forget a lot. I know I saw a quote the other day about how let's see, what was it? how history repeats itself because humanity constantly wants to rewrite and forget the mistakes and the horrors that exist instead of learning from it and doing better. And that's something that we see here, like with everything, the genocides, it happens in all different races, all different cultures, all different societies. And a lot of it stems from, you know what? I don't like you, so I'm going to find a reason, or I'm ignorant and it's fear-based. And you work off of the fear versus saying, hey, why is this happening and what can we do to change it? Not ignore it.
And a lot of the secrets to what we can do to change is to understand how we got here, and not be casual, and not talk about, well, this is the way it's always been. For many people, finding out about 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the destruction of Black Wall Street was just an epiphany. It was just something that and it's interesting because, people that are living there today, African Americans that are living there, didn't know that happened 99 years ago, that where they, was there. If you want to prevent the repetition of the mistakes of the past, you have to acknowledge the mistakes of the past. And I borrow this from religion, but it is not necessarily only a religious concept. If you can't admit that you made a mistake, if you have to live in denial that then you can never gain forgiveness. Mm-hmm. You can never you can never get to that next point. You're going to carry that burden with you for all your life. And can I use a little bit of strong language? It's not much of a not too much.
Go ahead.
Hope this won't offend anyone. I tell people all the time, particularly people that I work with, that I'm an asshole. I just am. And I was one yesterday, and I will probably be one tomorrow. But my goal is to be a little bit less of an asshole today than I was yesterday, and to be a little bit better. Just not to repeat the same mistakes, not to get stuck in where I was, and to be able to move forward from there. And a big part of that is the ability to say, I was wrong, and then to follow that up with, and I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That was really bravo on that. And that was really eloquent and well-spoken. And I think, right now, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of in society with this cancel culture is that, when someone says something or does something wrong, they just need to be canceled, and you never want to hear from them again. And that doesn't help. I like that you brought up the Race and Reconciliation Commissions. I believe that's what they're called in different parts of the world. Yep. They have it in Cambodia. They have it in Africa and South Africa as well, in a lot of different places. And I think those are fantastic things. I think they help people to heal. They help those nations to heal and move forward. And we all have made mistakes. And I don't think the cancel culture thing is healthy. I don't think it's a good thing. And I think in closing, if either of you have thoughts on that, and then
I'll give you one, Jeff, and it's a short one. They never played baseball. They didn't learn about this 3-strike rule. In today's world, we only get 1 strike and then you're out.
Right. That's
exactly. I keep on thinking of the mistakes that I have made in my life. I will say that I'm pretty pleased when I look at my 2 children who turned into just phenomenal human beings. I look at some of the things I've been able to do in business and some of the successes, and all of that's great. But I got there making mistakes, and I'm just really glad that people forgave me for my mistakes, as in the hope that I would forgive them for theirs. So
Likewise. I mean, I'll tell you something about forgiveness and making mistakes. Those that know my history, I have made quite a few mistakes. And one thing I can say about the Jewish people is I was really surprised the first time I went into a synagogue after I was out of the movement, and the love and the forgiveness and the compassion and the empathy of the people there was, I always go into situations expecting a worst case scenario. And the outpouring of kindness there was something I had never experienced before. And I want to learn from that and go forward with it and give back as much as I can to society in general and do well. And I think anybody can do that. And I think you stated it as eloquently as anyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for this. Parting thought, we began by talking about the lives that were lost at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And again, it was part of Kamau's show. The funerals for those that lost their lives in the Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh were paid for by the Islamic Center that is their neighbor. And then after the Christchurch mosque shooting, the synagogue did a GoFundMe and raised money. Hopefully, it's great that we do that in our saddest, most desperate times. Hopefully, we can have that kind of togetherness without the loss of life. But that's probably what's really important. Again, thank you guys so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming on, Larry. It's a great honor to have you, and that's about as good of a closing statement I think as we can have. That's phenomenal. I think a lot of people don't know that, but that solidarity between especially Jews and Muslims is fantastic. Acacia, do you have anything to close out?
No, I think you both said it perfectly. The biggest thing, right now it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all of the negativity that's going on and the violence that's going on all sides, really. And yeah. I don't care what race, religion, whatever you are, we see it happening all over. And the biggest thing I know, at least for me, and I think, for a lot of people, is that we have to remember that we need to come together in times of peace and in times of trial and tragedy. Because if we can't come together if we only come together in times of tragedy, yeah, then
there are going to be a lot of funerals. Yeah,
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So, yeah, that's my closing thoughts. We're all in this together.
Jeff, thank you for wearing your Made in Detroit shirt. Thank you very much for that. I just want to give a shout out to all my peeps in the 313. So,
all right,
heart goes out to you guys.
That's awesome.
Cheers, everybody.